In this episode, we consider what it means that the U.S. economy is becoming increasingly reliant on spending by the top 10% of earners to sustain the demand for goods and services that powers everything. Hello, welcome to the Call Like I See It podcast. I'm James Keys, and joining me today is a man whose takes are good enough that they really could be part of an ultra premium strand. Tunde Ogunlana. Tunde, are you ready to hit him with some of that chronic today?
Of course, man. Not only the strand and the chronic, but you've eugenicized my takes. I like it. They are superior genetically. Yes. So
now, before we get started, if you enjoy the show, I ask that you subscribe and like the show on YouTube or your podcast platform. Doing so really helps the show out. Now, recording on March 4th, 2025. And in a recent piece in the Wall Street Journal, we saw a breakdown of how spending in the U.S. economy is really being propped up by the top 10% of earners over the past few years and how this trending is increasing. The spending of particularly the spending of the top 10% of earners, their spending has increased relative to everyone else's. And while the bottom 90%, their spending has really kept pace with inflation, but hasn't really gone beyond that. And now the top 10% have always spent more of a proportional share than 10% due to, in significant part, them having more dispensable income. But what we're seeing now is, that group's relative spending is going to levels beyond anything we've seen since they've been keeping records of this stuff. So either this is great or something's getting out of whack here. And so we want to take a close look at that. So to get us started, Tunde, what do you make of these numbers showing that the top 10% of earners in the U.S., that their spending pretty much is propping up everything else and becoming a larger and larger part of the overall consumption pie?
Yeah, it's fascinating. What I make of it is it's a continued evidence of the trend we've seen. I mean, we can go back, I'd say, starting in the 80s with the concepts of things like trickle-down economics, which for many, it's well known that was a shift in, I would say, the economic ideology of the leadership of our country. It's kind of the first time since the 30s we went away from kind of the New Deal era of kind of macroeconomics and how the system was going to relate to all that. So that's one thing that stands out.
Let me add a little more of that, because I think it goes back even beyond that, because even if you have an industrialist, somebody like Henry Ford made the decision and saw the insight, if you go back before the New Deal, saying, I want to pay my workers enough that they can be consumers of my product, so that his workers could be buying cars. And he saw that he would make more money if he's paid them enough that they could buy cars as well. And so that kind of concept of having working class being able to sustain demand, be able to have the spending power to buy things, goes back beyond before the New Deal. The New Deal just kind of really weaponized it and says, hey, we can really build an economy if we have a strong middle class that is buying stuff and has dispensable income or single earners and all that can go and prop up the economy and do a lot in that way.
Yeah, now, that's an important point, because that also speaks to the point of the Marshall Plan post-World War II, which is for capitalism to thrive, it needs a market and it needs customers. So that's a good point, that the middle class in the United States became the domestic customer for our industry. And then,
with the Marshall Plan, we said we exported that to Europe, and let's go create middle classes there.
That's why I'm smiling. I'm smiling and saying it'd be nice for that to not end, but we'll see what happens. No, but then real quick, I'll get through a few points because I think they kind of all lead. I think, obviously we're talking about things that were decades ago and some of it even a century ago now. But I think the more recent post the kind of trickle down economics, I would just say, the continuing hollowing out of the working class that we know, kind of the stuff from the 90s, globalization, all that stuff, right? But I think more directly, we've got post 2008. Honestly, this is where the leadership in the country, both parties, haven't done a good job of supporting labor. So if you think about it, the minimum wage hasn't moved for 15 years. It's still at $7.50 federally, even though we all acknowledge the amount of inflation and things in recent years. So that obviously doesn't allow the bottom portion.
And the amount of growth and productivity, it's both.
And so that translates to then the next phase. And then I'll get off my soapbox here, which is the after '08, I think that's when we saw this thing really bifurcate more so, kind of with more acceleration, and meaning the bottom and the top kind of splitting. One is, I think, a low interest rate environment for a decade. That really helped prop up asset prices. So people who already came into the last decade, the 2010s, already owning stocks and real estate, just naturally kind of continued to float up their net worth, where people who weren't owners of capital, didn't have that ability. Yeah. Then to your point, the ability for low interest rates meant companies could borrow money. We see this explosion in the technology. So productivity increased a lot. So people like me and you, kind of the entrepreneur class, didn't have to rely on hiring as many people because we could deal with automation and ChatGPT and all that kind of stuff to help us. And I think you see an extra kind of bifurcation even more so post 2020, because I think that one of the, I'd say, dirty little secrets of the wealth class, twofold. One is the tax cuts, continued tax policy in the favor of the wealthy. I would say starting after the 2000 election, we just did a show about the estate tax, the ability for people to transfer more wealth over the last 25 years to next generations. And then we've got things like the income tax plan from 2017. That plus the stimulus, CARES Act, and all that, I think that the wealth class was able to just benefit much more than the rest of society. So
I think the dirty secret that you left it out, but that they know they're very good at getting money from the government in various ways. That a lot of that wealth comes from the government, not just they're titans.
You know what the dirty secret is?
When the government's handing out money, those guys are usually at the front of the line.
Yeah, that's where I'm going to get at, James. The dirty secret is a lot of the people we've seen in the media being busted for not handling PPP loans and EIDL loans properly are kind of the smaller end folks. Someone who stole 30 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand. But I mean, I remember there was a lot of stories about hedge funds getting $10 million. Tom Brady's company got $6 million.
Well, so, let's not get lost in the weeds, though. I mean,
but what I'm saying is it's the wealth class's ability, like you said, it's not a meritocracy. It's the ability to do financial engineering through the tax code. And like you said, know how to deal with the government and extract money from the government.
Yeah. I think the thing that I think that I want to jump on that you threw it out there a couple times, but we didn't go into it at all. And that's the trick. This seems to be trickle down economics. Like this seems to be, and that was kind of a change in mentality from this. Let's have the middle 80% of the country. Let's have their buying power prop up the demand and the consumption. And because it's so many people that you can just create this incredible economic engine because you got so many people that want stuff. So there's businesses opening everywhere. Like here's another dirty little secret is that businesses don't hire people because they get tax cuts. Businesses hire people when there's demand for whatever it is that they sell. So if you're a restaurant and you get some windfall of money, you don't just say, hey, you got a windfall of money. Let's go hire some people. But when you got a line out the door, that's when we got to go hire some people. We got to go serve. We got to serve more people. We got to go build more locations because we got all these people coming. So it's the demand that really drives everything, not tax cuts. But the idea of trickle down economics was instead of having this large mass of people that are driving everything, let's have it so that we'll give the wealthy more money, and then the fact of them doing well will trickle down and so forth. Like it'll trickle down to everybody else being able to do well. So this kind of seems to be what the setup is right here. That the wealthy are going to spend all this stuff, and then that spending is then going to sustain everyone else. It seems pretty risky, because the idea of trickle down, every time it's been tried before, what you end up having is the government having to borrow a lot of money. The idea of trickle down economics is that you can lower the tax code on the wealthy, but you'll collect more in taxes because there'll be more economic activity. Well, that thing has never worked. So when they lower the tax code, the wealthy keep more, and then they may spend more, but it doesn't make up the difference. So it seems to be risky because what ends up happening is that the government tends to have to borrow a lot of money to make up the difference in the gap between what was done. So this seems to be kind of the vision of the trickle-down economics come to life. And so now we're going to live with the consequences, so to speak. Now, obviously, our government still borrows a lot of money. It always has. When Reagan tried to put this stuff in, like he had the largest tax increase, doubled the payroll taxes on the middle class, largest payroll tax or largest tax increase on the middle class ever. And then also they still started running big deficits. So it didn't really work then. George H.W. Bush had to raise taxes to kind of try to balance things out. But nonetheless, what we're doing, I like when we get to see different things. Now, I hope that we learn the lessons when we do. Like, and a lot of times that's not the case. But at least now we're going to see what happens when you create this top heavy economy where only the top 10% of earners are the ones that have the prosperity to really go out and do all this stuff. And everybody else is kind of living tight, And so it's not necessarily kind of the way I would draw it up, but I would like to see and be able to then use this as evidence in the future saying, hey, this is why we can't do this if it's going to play out the way I think, or at least we'll learn something from it. And as far as the pros and cons and the ways it works and the way it doesn't. So it's a data point that's about to happen and we're about to see it. And, we all have our thoughts, but, we're going to see now.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot actually to kind of tackle with this. I know we won't get through it all today, but, you say a few things. So one is because as you're talking about Reagan to George H.W. Bush, and then I'm reminded that Al Gore was tasked in 1993 with trying to clean up the federal government. And it's interesting now we have the contrast with this new Doge thing because he did it over about 4 or 5 years. They eliminated, I think it was around 200,000 federal employees kind of jobs. But then what happened is we finished that decade with a $200 billion budget surplus by the year 2000. So look how different the world is in 25 years. But so to your point, James, it's interesting because people right now in our society are very nostalgic for an American period of time that they think was great. And that's usually when you ask people, they think about the 1950s till about JFK's era. Yeah. And if you think about that, that is all the results of the New Deal, like we're talking about, right? That's the largest middle class in the country, in the world history. And it took a generation from the 30s to get there. And
kind of the opposite of what we're doing now,
exactly. That's kind of what I'm saying is that
the current administration is intending to do. The current administration wants to.
That's what I'm saying is that, and that's why I bring up even the Al Gore thing, which is there's a way to cut budgets and all that, but it may have a different outcome the way it's happening now at lightning speed versus in a more measured way. But I know that's not the main topic. One example I wanted to give, James, and I'm gonna give some anecdotal, but I don't want to give away too much because my wife will be unhappy if I start spilling too much of our financial beans to the world. But I want to give people, because I think people don't understand how this tax code stuff really does help wealthy people keep more money. So I'm gonna talk about me. I'm not super wealthy, but I do okay. And what happens is in the 2017 tax code, there was something put in there called bonus depreciation. And if you buy certain assets, the IRS allows you to depreciate 100% of the value of the asset against your income. Now, the benefit and the way I look at that as positive is that keeps a lot of the velocity of money in the economy. It gives confidence.
That's demand. That creates consumption. Yeah.
Someone like me who's an entrepreneur, I might not want to take the risk to go buy and make a big capital investment. But if I'm given this incentive by the tax code, maybe I'll do it. And guess what? Some company gets my money. I bought their product. They got employees. They get to pay, so on and so forth. The money flows through the economy. So the example is at the time in 2021, I bought a new capital asset, which was pretty expensive, a few $100,000 in value. And I was able to use 100% bonus depreciation, which was part of the first Trump administration tax, situation tax cut from 2017. What that allowed, my accountant looked at me and said, Tunde, you got a couple choices here. We can stretch this out over 7 years. You can take it all 100% right now, or you can take half up front and stretch the rest out over the next 7 years or however many years. And long story short, I did the half up front.
That's amazing that you say that now.
But I did the half up front and the stretching the other half. So in 2021, I should have been paying in the 30-something% tax bracket because of my income. It was definitely in the top, probably 5-6%.
Yeah, continue.
And that's my point. But I paid 0% income tax that year, federal income tax, and we live in Florida, so I paid no state income tax because of bonus depreciation. And then since 2021, haven't done my 24 taxes yet, but the next couple of years, I paid basically an 8% effective tax rate. Yeah. So the point is that that's why I wanted to stay on this, not to brag about myself, but to say from a personal level exactly what you said. The fact I'm not paying 30% for 35, 37% what I should be, and I'm paying 8 has not made me want to go hire new people. I don't need new people in my business. I don't have, if I get more demand, need more people. But all I've done is keep that money. And My nihilistic attitude now is I'm waiting for this tax cut again this year. And I don't mean to sound like an arrogant guy, but I just looked at my wife and say, what kind of boat are we going to buy again if he gives us another set of goodies? And here's the other thing about where the policy is steered towards. Those assets for bonus depreciation that qualify are capital assets like business equipment and stuff like that. But boats, jets, vehicles over 6,000 pounds. Generally, people in the wealth class are buying those kind of assets. It's not people at
they're buying them anyway.
Yeah.
So it great.
But if I get to pay $10 million for a jet and take that off my income, which I couldn't do before 2017 in the same way, that means I'm not paying as much income tax. And that's all I'm saying.
And isn't necessarily, in terms of everybody paying their fair share, isn't necessarily the way to do it. It's a way that people, that the system can be gamed, so to speak. And, but I want to now this is what happens when we have an economic conversation with someone who's a wealth manager. But I wanted to get more to support like salient things just in general.
Sorry about that, guys.
But for me, I see this and, okay, the spending from the bulk of the earners in the United States is barely keeping up with inflation. And that means that cuts are being made across the board because things are costing more. People are spending the same amount, but they're getting less, more or less. But what that means is that makes sense if you look at some of the issues that are most politically salient right now. Like it would make sense that then people would be very nervous or upset about the idea of immigration because 90% of the people feel like they're just barely getting by or worse, or something like DEI. All of these things that create this scarcity mindset amongst the bulk of the people make like, okay, well, yeah, we can't have more people or, if there's any chance that anybody's getting a leg up on me, I should say this, if there's any chance that anybody in my class is getting a leg up on me, then, I'm going to react to it completely and be so amped up on it. That scarcity mindset, the idea that everybody is in the 90% is very tight. Issues that can be perceived to affect their economics are just going to be more salient right now and are going to draw a sharper reaction. And so, I think generally speaking, this doesn't necessarily speak to that. But generally speaking, the other piece I'll make on this is that the increasing wealth gap that we are seeing, which drives this, that also is something else that we've said to care about, is like having a democratic society, the health of our republic. And that stuff, it's known to be a risk factor when wealth equality gets really out of whack, to be a risk factor for the ability to maintain democratic societies. People get, that mindset of that scarcity mindset, and it becomes harder to say, all right, I play by the rules, you play by the rules. It starts to feel like nobody's playing by the rules. So why should I? So this is going to put other pressures in other areas of our life, and is more so my point with that. And so the economy so far has sustained. Now, the question of whether it's sustained in a bubble way, because the type of spending, the growth in asset prices because of where all this money's flowing, is something that eventually could, if there's a bottom that drops out, could harm us. We don't know. We're going to see, there's stuff to suggest that that's the case. But nonetheless, there are plenty of risk factors that are present that I don't think leadership is really concerned right now. Like the leadership is really looking at this from an ideological standpoint. And again, they're going to play it out. And the hope is, again, just that whatever we learn from it, that the lessons can be remembered. Because like you point out, people look at the United States economy from an nostalgia standpoint, but they don't think about the fact that at the time when they like, oh yeah, this is when, the middle class was great. The top income tax rate was 93%. Like that was what the rate was then. But people don't connect that to the prosperity of the middle class. They connect whatever else to it, which can be a lot of times what they're fed, because nostalgia is not a accurate replaying of what actually happened. So
listen,
I think that in this instance, if things go well, then, you want to remember what the lessons are. But if things go poorly, you would want to remember what those lessons are too. And that's just what I hope, or that we can be reminded of those lessons.
Listen, man, whatever. When I win the Powerball, that's why I'm voting for guys that don't want a 90%
down now.
Got to keep
when
the
I win
tax rate
correct,
below 90%.
It'll still
and then
be
when
low,
my son makes the NBA, he doesn't play basketball, but by the way, he'll make the NBA, and then he's going to make $100 million. So I want the taxes real low. But anyway, but what I was thinking, man, because it's interesting, this conversation, the contrast with what we're seeing now, from the way that our current administration and leadership is handling just the idea of cutting costs and in order to balance out the budget to be able to give more tax cuts to people like me. And that I don't mean to sound just like a smartass, but that's why I'm just like, all right, I'll take it. But I know I'm taking it at the expense of potentially the way our society has been, and I'm taking that very serious. That because if I look at, I don't know if this is a bookend, but if we look at the Reaganomics being the start in the 1980s, of really a kind of overt attack on the New Deal. You know what, James? I thought about it as you were talking earlier. I'm thinking, like, what happened that got the public, not the leadership, because leadership always is going to have their ideologies, but what swayed the public from being this big kind of monolith blob from the 1930s to the 1970s that generally said, I'm accepting this New Deal thing, and we like this middle class stuff, and we like the GI Bill, and everybody got to go to college, and blah blah blah, right?
I mean, what you're describing is a level of class solidarity that existed in the mid 1900s that has dissipated in large.
Well, that's where I'm kind of going with my guessing game here, because you said something of interest that I actually wrote down. People, they don't like seeing people, like you said, people of your class, or that they don't want to see taxes on people higher than their class or something like that. And what the other thing,
it's that crab in the bucket mentality that we see a lot of times with middle class, working class, where they're very offended if they feel like somebody around them is getting a leg up.
That's what
and the reason I bring that up is because they seem to not have a blind spot, or it's that kind of aspirational thing. If people at the top class are getting a leg up, it's kind of like, oh, no big deal, or even they'll cheer for it. It's the crazy. It's like when you see in pro sports a lot of times when there's labor strife in pro sports and people are really hard on the players and then they're rooting for the owners. And it's like, I think you got this backwards. We want the people that are earning the money to get more of the money.
No, but that's where I'm going, is that, because there was somewhere from the late 1960s through the early 80s, there was this shift with a lot of Americans, and Ronald Reagan, I think, captured this perfectly. And this is interesting. I got this love-hate relationship with how I feel about Reagan, because I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm born in 1978. So my early memories of my life are Ronald Reagan was the president. So to me, there's something special about him that way. I remember doing the Easter egg roll on the White House lawn and meeting Nancy Reagan. So I've got a very personal connection, I feel like, with the Reagans, because I grew up in that era, and I'm proud that we beat the Soviets, and all that stuff, right? And he was an eloquent speaker. But as an adult, I look back at some of his policies and I'm like, hey, dude, this was the start of what we're talking about here. This kind of hollowing out of the middle class. And one thing that he was very good at, Ronald Reagan, was rhetoric. And he was the first politician and US president that really brought in this idea that government is the problem. And I think, to your point, James, that's how they were able, meaning that the kind of wealth class was able to fracture the middle and lower classes at that time, was using kind of the Southern strategy. This whole, we're getting far away from this now in living memory.
Yeah, I was going to say,
60s and early 70s
up here, so let's.
Yeah, was a lot. So I think that was the beginning of it. And to your point, James, the ability to create more fracturing of the lower middle class today, because things are scarce and people feel like they got to elbow other people out of the way, we've seen it, right? The Haitians eating pets and the immigrant stuff.
But it requires a level of deflection that, in my opinion, boggles the mind. But it definitely, like the wealth class, the haves, quote unquote, like they've been able to maintain, like the few have been able to maintain more of the resources than the many for a long time, because there are a lot of techniques that have been proven to show that. But the idea that you have this scarcity mindset amongst the working people, and I saw this. I saw this on Twitter, so I don't know if it's true. But the idea that Elon Musk goes from a net wealth of 2 billion to 449 billion between 2012 and 2025, or Bezos goes from 18 billion to 245 billion. Like the idea that the world we live in has that kind of wealth growth, while the working class and middle class people are all knifing each other about, oh, well, you're getting ahead and all this other stuff, is just mind boggling to me, because it does seem to me that at the top end, like you're saying, oh, the tax cuts for people like you. It's not really for people like you. You get to ride the coattails. It's really for people like them, and they're the ones who benefit much more from these type of stuff. Whereas, somebody, like I said, somebody like you gets to ride the coattails of that. But the idea that so successfully that the working and middle classes, coming out of an era where there was such solidarity and the solidarity worked. Like, you did create this society where you had one earner households that lived a middle class lifestyle and had houses and all this other stuff. It actually worked, and you had the most robust economy in the world, in the history of the world, and all this other stuff. And coming out of that, it's like it never happened. And then it's like, oh yeah, if you raise taxes, if you go above 40% taxes, the whole thing will fall apart. And it's like, we had 93 at one point. We had 75 at one point. Like, so, I think they did a good job of kind of taking over the intellectual thought process.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Like, and I think Reagan was kind of where we saw that coming out. I think the work, though, remember, as soon as the New Deal hit, they started working on trying to undermine it. And so I think that the fact that so many of the assumptions of people now are in such favor of the wealth class. I mean, Warren Buffett said it. There is a class war, and my class won. And he wasn't saying that because he's trying to take advantage of other people. He's saying that he points out the way that I pay a lower tax rate than my secretary. So there are people that say it, but that doesn't capture the imagination. The last point, I want to get out of here.
You're right, because it's like me talking about my situation now in this discussion, right? I'm not saying it to be negative to people. I'm just saying this is a matter of fact. I just want to explain real quick what you're saying, because it's a great point about Bezos. Let's pick on him for a second. Why would these people support this? So real quick, I'm just looking now. As of the most recent numbers, Amazon's gross revenue was $637 billion for the last year. Think about this, James. In 2017, prior to the first tax cut of Trump, the corporate tax rate was at 35%.
Yeah.
Today, they are talking about if this year goes the way that I'm hearing the chatter go, it's going to be lowered to 15%.
Yeah.
Think about Jeff Bezos as the largest shareholder of Amazon, gets now his company to keep 20% of $637 billion every year if this tax cuts go through. Right now, the tax rate's at 28%, so he's still doing better than he was. So the point is, a lot of people kind of question, well, why would Jeff Bezos, tell the editorial board not to endorse a candidate before the election and all that? And this is what I'm saying about really the oligarch and wealth class. And I don't say this to knock Bezos. This is just his self-interest.
He's playing the game.
And what's happening
is... The problem isn't that he's playing the game. The problem is that everybody in the middle class and working class don't realize there's a game being played.
That's exactly it. We're worrying about Haitians eating our pets and about if the hurricane's controlled by the government and how much waste is in Social Security and things that, I guess they're important to a lot of people, but we're going to keep having this infighting and this being divided and conquered by this wealth class if we don't wake up and say, wow, these people are just financially engineering their way from continuing to siphon money to the top. And you're right, James. I'm riding these guys' coattails. And why not? Because my fellow Americans don't seem to be caring about trying to do anything else except fight. So I'm just going to keep.
There are very few monks in the world that are taking these vows.
And I'm not dying on this hill. I got a few more decades to live, and then I'm out. So,
well, no, but and that's kind of to some degree.
That's the nihilism.
I don't know if the question is whether you should be foregoing these things that are available to you, as opposed to kind of what you're doing now is trying to raise the alarm, because you don't solve the problem if you just say, oh, well, I won't do that. That doesn't solve the problem at all. What solves the problem is if...
What do you mean? I should just write a bigger check to the IRS?
Again, people's consciousness has to become aware of this to where... And then some of this is just an uphill climb because, and it's not all the time, but in many respects, you have people that have extreme wealth. Their fixation on wealth allows them to stay focused when other issues are going on, whereas people who aren't fixated on wealth can be easily distracted from matters, when it comes to this. So it's not something that is an easy, swing, so to speak. There's a reason why the few have had the resources and the many have been excluded from the resources for most of human history. But in this country, we did get it right once. We did throw that balance into where it was a place where the spoils that were being generated in society were being more fairly distributed. And so it's possible that we can do it again if we learn the right lessons from that. So, but right now we are in the mode of, okay, top 10%, you guys drive everything. Everybody else hold on for dear life, and we're going to ride that train until either the train falls off the tracks or something else happens. And so, but nonetheless, it's good to be aware of that's what's happening right now. And so that's why I thought this was a worthwhile topic. So I think we can wrap from there. We appreciate everybody for joining us on this episode of Call Like I See It. We'll have a part 2 coming out today, so check that out as well, and we'll talk to you soon.